If you make more money than the narcissistic person, these relationships will almost always go poorly. Narcissistic people are not good at playing second fiddle, and least of all financially, and they will often clang and tantrum around in a really victimized and sullen manner. Perhaps one of the most profound family roles that people resonate with is the role of the truth seer or the truth teller. Not everyone speaks the truth. It's not safe to, right? But it's the person who is a child in a narcissistic family system, sort of preternaturally knew something wasn't quite right. Seeing it didn't mean that you didn't subjugate your needs to the narcissistic parent. You still silence yourselves. You still had to find ways to get attachment and safety. You still had to give in to the toxic structure. But the truth seers, you saw it. You knew it wasn't right. At some level, the narcissistic parent knew you knew, if that makes sense. Sometimes the truth seer does become a truth teller, though that's a risky play. The truth teller is the one that gets in the snappy one-liners. Things like, well, Dad doesn't like it when someone knows more about money than he does, and leaves the narcissistic parent feeling exposed. So as you can imagine, that observant child who makes their observation out loud then incurs the wrath of that narcissistic parent. And because the narcissistic parent forever sort of feels found out by the child who got it and saw it, that truth-seeing and then truth-telling child is sort of doomed within the family system, or at least where the narcissistic person is involved. So why do kids become truth seers or truth tellers? These may be children who are innately more intuitive, intelligent, have observant temperaments, have an empathic and agreeable quality to their temperaments. They may be more somatically attuned, but I have worked with many adult clients who were childhood truth seers, and they remain very intuitive and aware in adulthood. The truth seer child sort of observes it all and takes it all in. They kind of inherently get who the players are in a family system. And interestingly, because of this, the truth seer child can also fall into other roles. They maybe become, for example, fixers, because they may perceive that a more vulnerable sibling or a parent can be protected. They sort of perceive the holes in the system and try to protect people within that system. Not all truth seers and truth tellers do, but that is a way that the truth seer roles can get mixed up with the other roles that I discuss at length in the book. But the almost universal dynamic is that the truth seer or the truth teller becomes the scapegoat. I'd say it's kind of inevitable. In essence, the truth seer has pointed out that emperor of a narcissistic parent is naked. A more agreeable truth seer child may not be snarky about it. It may just register in the expression on their face. In fact, the more agreeable and empathic truth seer may actually remain silent, fearful of hurting the narcissistic parent, fearful of the harm it would cause others if they said something, and will often slide into the exhausting caregiving and protective role. Interestingly, a truth-seeing child who has a little more snark in them may even have some of the parent's antagonism in their temperament. They may engage in more sort of facial expressions that betray what they're feeling, sullen behavior, one-liners, or unwanted observations that can make them a target even more quickly. One thing to remember, and something I revisited many times on this channel, is that narcissistic folks, despite their lack of empathy, are very socially perceptive. They know the score, and they are aware of what is happening in a room. And so if they perceive that someone really sees them or sees through them to their depths, they do not like it. And when that is an easy target, like a child, whereas an adult, the narcissistic person has power, they will exert their power and shut that truth-seeing or truth-speaking child down and put them in their place. And that is where the scapegoating begins. We know
that some kids are scapegoated by narcissistic parents for a variety of reasons. They don't look the way the parent wants. They don't do the things that the parent wants. They want some attention or any attention that the parent doesn't want to give to them. They don't meet the parent's needs the way the parent wants. Whatever it is, the scapegoated child becomes the narcissistic parent's target and the recipient of the worst of their behavior. Truth seers almost inevitably become scapegoats. Some kids are scapegoats without being truth seers, by the way, but truth seers also become scapegoats. The narcissistic parent may view the truth teller as colluding with the other parent. And remember, they won't be in touch with the truth-telling aspect of it. It's just that there's something about the child that will make the narcissistic parent uncomfortable. And the narcissistic parent's complete and utter lack of self-awareness, lack of self-reflective capacity, their preoccupation only with themselves means that they won't get it. They will at some level perceive their child as a threat. When a child is scapegoated, the parent's behavior is on a continuum of scapegoat abuse, right? In the most severe cases, the child may be physically abused or subjected to horrific neglect or things like deprivation of food. Other manifestations of scapegoating may be ignoring the child, treating other siblings significantly better than the scapegoated child, blaming the scapegoated child for everything that goes wrong, even when it is patently clear that someone else is responsible. Doing things like using disparaging nicknames repeated, like, "Oh, hey, dummy. Oh, look, Fatty is home." Blaming the scapegoated child for the narcissistic parent's own failures. The parent saying things like, "My career never took off because of you." Being subjected to more of the parent's yelling and rage. Not being given a gift when other people in the family system are. Being pushed to become financially independent more quickly than siblings or early than would be developmentally appropriate. The scapegoated child lives in permanent punishment for the narcissistic parent's weaknesses. It's as though the narcissistic parent's self-loathing is largely taken out on this child. The truth teller / truth seer is a unique case because the truth seer may actually be the child who has the attributes that the parent wants. They would have been prime golden child material. These are the kids who might have the appearance or the skills, but they're also a child who sees through that parent. That may create even more tension, but ultimately, by being seen, unmasked as it were, the narcissistic parent will be incensed. This is a pernicious dynamic because truth seers may view their perceptiveness as they come into adulthood as more of a curse than a blessing. But I got to tell you, it is a blessing because it's really the seed of discernment. It's not necessarily a protection. The trauma-bonded cycles that get created by a narcissistic parental relationship still happen for a truth-seeing child. A child still needs their parent, even if it's a narcissistic one. These family roles are important to understand in terms of how they may have affected you within a narcissistic family system. And while the truth teller and truth seer roles may have been so deeply felt, it can be painful to acknowledge the associated risks. So let's say you're observing the behavior of a person close to you. Okay, you're observing somebody close to you, I should say. A partner, an adult child, friend, family member. They're having an encounter with somebody, or they're sharing with you about an encounter they had with someone. And the other person they were talking to, so this person you care about was talking to another person that was toxic. Maybe that other person was gaslighting them or manipulating them or invalidating them or just treating them as though they were somehow less than. So you, the empathic person you are, and now aware of what narcissism is, the empathic person you are says something. You say like, I don't like how this person was talking to you. And would you believe it? You are quite likely to get nailed for being a nasty person, for being mean, or for bad-mouthing someone. So you went from trying to be kind to someone, the person you care about, to becoming the bad one, just like that. What the hell is this about? So, if any of you grew up in a narcissistic family system, especially if you were a truth teller or observed other truth tellers in your family, despite all the toxicity floating around, if someone dared called out the toxic patterns that were in your midst, they were often shut down, right? If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything, which would effectively turn most narcissistic households into silent monasteries in which only the narcissistic people kept speaking and spewing their invalidating stuff on everyone. This silencing of observations about unhealthy behavior is actually how a lot of intergenerational abuse gets perpetuated. Each generation gets the message that, oh, you shouldn't say such things, so you shouldn't point out such things. Shh, shh, shh. And so unless you are a masochist or just plain courageous, or both, you keep doing it and endure being told that you're a mean-spirited person, or you simply distance from the system. I don't know what other option you have otherwise to sit silently in the midst of that and watch all this happen, which I also know many people do. Enablers and narcissistic folks are very quick to call any feedback about toxic traits. They'll call it things like character assassinations, witch hunts, meanness. However, when the narcissistic people do their number on someone else, they'll often say something like, I don't have a filter. You know that I don't mean it. It's just a joke. And then the enablers will pipe in and say, oh, you know how they are. They never mean it. Their bark is worse than their bite. People like the status quo. It's the reason these long-term committed relationships and marriages, family cycles, and even workplaces and friendships can often remain in unhealthy patterns for a really long time. And they stay stagnated if there is no way for a person to offer constructive feedback. So you can't say things like, hey, you know what? I don't love the way your friends talk to you. The way they talk to you is disrespectful. Or if you say something like, come on, your friend is always gaslighting you. You deserve better. You're giving actually loving feedback, and then they attack you. Now, the way we give feedback does matter. Tempting though it may be, there is no real win in rolling up to somebody and saying, haha, your mother's a narcissist, run away from her, or saying, hey, all your friends are a-holes, dump them. That's not a good approach. But instead, compassionately focusing on unhealthy patterns and our concern for someone who's experiencing them. Or, if it is happening to us, to be able to say, hey, I don't like how your friend was talking to me. Now, I think a major reason that so many people are suffering in these narcissistic relationships is because there's no end in sight. If a person even tries to protect someone else from invalidating friends or family, the person who is trying to do the protecting is often sort of labeled or identified as the bad one, instead of the invalidating friends being the ones who are brought into question. I've been in this situation many times, and at this point, I'm sort of resigned to people calling me demanding or too serious or some other lovely obscene terms. It takes a toll. I notice over the years that I do keep more to myself and save my feedback for YouTube instead of offering it to other people. I figure this at least some way someone's getting it here. But that it's not always possible when we see these patterns happening to someone we care about. Calling out toxic patterns is not a character assassination. Now, there's a way to do it by focusing on the behaviors and not on the person. Instead of saying he's a jerk, he's rude, a better approach may be, the way he keeps putting you down or keeps putting down the quality of your work, that concerns me. Are you okay? But usually people will just soft pedal that and say, he doesn't mean nothing by it. And just like that, you can easily see how these patterns persist. It still hurts, though, that when you're trying to protect someone, you're the one who's framed as the person who's the problem. I'll never be able to get my head fully around why people are so protective of narcissistic, gaslighty, or manipulative people in our midst. Maybe we don't want people putting our behavior to a higher standard. I don't know. Maybe we're struggling with our trauma bonds, but I think mostly people don't want to interrupt the status quo. I have to say that in the mental health profession, this is a real problem. And I have actually gotten my sternest pushbacks and rebukes from other mental health practitioners who will say, talking about narcissistic behavior is defeatist, and Dr. Ramani, it's not empathic. And I shudder to think that these folks may also be minimizing these experiences in their own clients. These patterns are just not okay. Now listen, none of this is ever going to change overnight, but sometimes we just need to be validated. If this is happening to you, you need that validation so you don't feel like you're lost. That your great transgression was that you pointed out to someone you care about that you don't like how someone is treating them, and that you are the one who is labeled as the one who's engaging in a character assassination. Honestly, after that happens to you once, you got to step back and say, they're on their own. If this is how they want to be talked to, but the one place you can exert a boundary and say, I don't know if I feel comfortable coming to this. I don't like how those people behave, and I don't like how they talk to you. So you all have a good time. I'm going to take a pass. They're still going to have bad things to say about you, but at least you've protected yourself. Let's talk about dating, or even just meeting new people after you've been through narcissistic abuse. Okay, so use that as an example. You're starting to get it, starting to understand it. You watched all of the damned videos, you read the books and the blogs, you know the red flags, you recognize the red flags. You're like, I'm going to start paying attention to these. And you set boundaries. You walk away from relationships that don't work, and you do it early and you do it quickly instead of hanging around and waiting for more abuse. And you no longer stick around for too long despite the red flags popping up. And then friends may ask you, why didn't that new relationship work out? And you may respond, well, because that new person, they weren't treating me well. They were making passive-aggressive comments about my job, or they constantly interrupted me while I was speaking, or they would tune out whenever the conversation wasn't about them, or they were regularly late, or they would compare me to other people a lot, or I felt gaslighted when I wanted to move the relationship at a pace that felt more comfortable to me, right? That all sounds like the stuff we talk about even on this channel. And then the problem is, too many people will get hit with, wow, well, if that's the case, then no more complaining by you about being single. Sounds like your standards are too high. Say what? And this here is the problem. So let's talk about this idea of your standards being too high, because I have a real problem with that. These words are really, really dangerous and have gotten so many people stuck in narcissistic relationships. These are people, including yourselves, who likely saw red flags early on, may have even tried to honor them, but then really felt the pressure to ignore them with this suggestion that your standards are too high. Now, this tends to go down when a person is just being careful, knowing that some things don't feel good, but unless the red flags are egregious, like really, really bad, like, I don't know, like telling you that they're married on their first date or something, the whole enabling culture that's always all about, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, let's give them a second chance, that can lead people to tell you that you are honing in on the more subtle red flags, that your standards are too high. There are a couple of things happening here. First, we do live in a world full of enablers, and nonsense like telling people that their standards are too high is just a form of enabling. Second, it's something we can view as being conformity pressure. People saying things like, oh, all relationships are hard. Everyone needs to make major compromises in a relationship. It's as though all of these people are saying, why should you actually get to honor red flags when everyone else out there is in their mediocre relationships? And I sometimes wonder if it's actually an unconscious but manipulative play to ensure that everyone is equally unhappy. I know that sounds really cynical, but I do have to wonder that everyone's almost trying to keep everyone's balloons from going down because everyone's kind of miserable. Third, it's a way of keeping someone in their place, of in essence telling the person being accused of having such high standards that maybe they ain't all that. Like, who do you think you are thinking that you can actually set boundaries and pay attention to red flags? As though you don't even have the right to that. And now, this dynamic can be particularly pronounced for people who come from narcissistic families of origin, where there's always that tendency to undercut people and say, oh, what makes you so special? Meanwhile, they always think that they're so special. Now, whatever the reasons are, it is a terrible thing. And this conversation isn't limited to just dating relationships. I have heard many a tale of people being told this by their narcissistic parents or their siblings when they are adults. When the adult child in a narcissistic family system actually does the hard psychological work, learns to set better boundaries, and perhaps even tells the parent or family member that, listen, I am setting boundaries here, or you start to respond differently, then people in those situations are hit with, well, then your standards for a parent or a family member are just too high. This can also happen in the workplace, basically any human relationship, where people are actually having very basic behavioral standards and then are hit back with, oh, maybe your standards are too high. Now, narcissistic folks do this as part of their gaslighting ground game. They tell you that your standards are too high when you are hurt or upset by their bad behavior. And if you are gaslighted enough, you may start to believe that expecting someone to not cheat, or expecting someone to call you back, or expecting someone to not send inappropriate text messages to other people, or expecting someone to not lie is setting too high a standard, because now you're holding the narcissistic person to a standard, and so they make you sound like you're the one who is out of control. Now, is there such a thing as standards that are too high? Sure. That may look like expecting someone to read your mind, or pick you up at the airport every time you ask, or regularly turn their schedule around to accommodate you, expecting expensive dinners or gifts out regularly, even though the person may have to stretch themselves to make that happen. Like, one could actually argue that it's the narcissistic folks who have standards that are too high. But most of us do not have high enough standards that we hold for the behavior of other people. We are our own worst enemies. We are constantly caught in an internal sort of self-talk of maybe my standards are too high. Maybe this is as good as it gets. I need to be realistic or I will be alone forever. I need to settle if I'm ever going to have a family. And those kinds of beliefs, that kind of thinking, have landed far too many people into narcissistic relationships. Now, most of us don't hold high enough standards within our relationships or for other people. We make too many justifications, we cut too much slack, and we feel we don't deserve better. So when you finally really do the work and actually try to start holding people to a basic behavioral standard, especially if you have had a track record of having dated or been in relationships with toxic people, or just having to deal with toxic people regularly, and then have people tell you that your standards are too high, it can really piss you off. And if you are at all suggestible or have any self-doubt, which most survivors of narcissistic abuse do, you may doubt yourself and stay in the relationship, and may even talk yourself out of the accumulating red flags because you were just told that maybe your standards are too high. And if after being treated really badly at multiple family events, and you finally set boundaries and explain to other family members why you needed to set boundaries, or that you even disengaged, to have people come up to you and say things like, well, I think your standards are too high, can almost make you wonder if the family was glad that you were the resident scapegoat or punching bag, so that they could avoid the wrath of the narcissistic person, and that they may be getting it now because you're no longer available to be that punching bag. Now, usually, when people are telling you that your standards are too high, when especially obviously when your standards are within the realm of normal, your standards may be simple things like be on time, let me know if you're late, don't lie to me, be kind, listen when I talk, show some basic empathy, don't cheat. If somebody's telling you that those standards are too high, then you need to pay attention to the messenger. Many a person who finally understands narcissistic abuse and honors red flags or sets boundaries in existing relationships has been hit with this unkind, enabling critique. All of us need to find good sounding boards when we go through this. People that you trust, who want what is best for you, who aren't enablers. These people are precious and can give you that essential reality check. You deserve to be valued and cherished and seen. That is not too high a standard. Please stop listening to the people who would tell you otherwise.
What do you think happens when you make more money than the narcissistic person? Now, this is a funny one, right? Because it's easy to see how it happens. It's easy to see why it wouldn't happen, but it's really easy to see how this situation gets really messy really fast. So let's just start from the top with close relationships. And let's start with the beginning of a new close relationship. You're getting to know someone. Remember, narcissistic people, when it comes to finding a new partner, they like folks who are somehow often fancy and shiny and aspirational. And if they meet you and you make more money than them, well, that is almost like an enticement, a challenge. Not to mention that you may offer access to things that they want but currently cannot afford. However, from the very beginning, if you make more money than them, or for some reason you have more money than them, their insecurities and inadequacies will really start popping up early. This may come out in passive aggression. Most commonly, it'll be passive aggressive stuff. Many people who find themselves in this situation may feel the need to appease the narcissistic person. They may not even know they're narcissistic yet, or even downplay their higher earnings to keep the relationship going. And this will set the tune for an insecure, embattled relationship for as long as it lasts. If you make more money than a person with this kind of personality style, you may find yourself feeling like you need to defend it, or having to endure their minimization and invalidation of what you do, the training you had to go through, or whether you're even worth it. Again, initially, lots of people defend themselves, but over time, it gets very exhausting. And if you yourself have any neuroses around your success, you may get stuck in an endless loop with this narcissistic person, forever trying to defend and explain how it is you make your money. Now, I must say that if you are in a relationship with a narcissistic person, and at the beginning of the relationship, you are either making the same amount of money as them or less, and then over time you're making more, first of all, bravo. That was not easy to do. When you are in a narcissistic relationship, you are being invalidated and devalued in so many different ways that it can be very difficult to focus at work, or to advocate for yourself, and to do the work that's needed to advance or grow in a career. And to be able to do that while someone is always undermining you is difficult. But if you manage to pull that off, making more money now, then you will have all of the headaches that I already shared. the passive aggression, the shame rage spirals, because their shame will always be activated since their inadequacy is activated by your success. So you will be living with a lot of rage. In addition, in a close relationship, you may also see that the narcissistic person will act out if you make more money. I'll give you one example of this. It's a not uncommon way that this could play out is bizarrely infidelity. So I'm going to use sort of a heterosexual trope on this for a minute. Bear with me. Imagine that there's a male partner feeling emasculated if their partner is making more money than them, and that becomes the rationale for their straying, especially that if they also have more free time than you. And believe it or not, some people fall for that. However, this can happen regardless of gender. And the idea that the narcissistic person has less power in a very important space, basically money, will lead them to trying to get that power back somehow. And if they can't dominate in this relationship via money, they will find another way to hold that power or act out. Now, a huge, huge, huge mistake that people make when they make more money than the narcissistic person is that they try to help them out financially or try to bring them into their own professional fold. So for example, let's say you're the one who's making more and you have a business that's doing pretty well. Bringing that narcissistic person into the business so that they can get paid and feel better about themselves, or letting the narcissistic person get too involved in the business. Bad, bad, bad idea. If I had $1 for every story like this that went south, then I would be the one who has more money than the narcissistic people. Too often, the person who makes more money than a difficult narcissistic partner they can feel guilty. That guilt is also why they're probably stuck in the narcissistic relationship, and will try to help the narcissistic person feel better by letting them be a part of things. More often than not, if you were to bring them into the fold of a business, the narcissistic partner will try to start controlling things, may even make bad decisions that hurt the overall business. They will definitely be the most toxic employee you ever had, and they will also likely triangulate or abuse your existing staff. Do not do it. Now, if you have a career in your career where you make more money is with an employer or an institution where it's just simply not possible for you to try to bring the narcissistic person into the fold, there can be a risk of feeling the need to take care of the narcissistic person financially, pour money into assets that benefit both of you, like a bigger house or fancy car, paying for vacations, things that not only bring the narcissistic person pleasure, but make them help them look better to the world. Again, this is another pathway by which the narcissistic relationship again devolves into something transactional. If you make more money than the narcissistic person, these relationships will almost always go poorly. Narcissistic people are not good at playing second fiddle, and least of all financially, and they will often clang and tantrum around in a really victimized and sullen manner. It will bring out the victim in the vulnerable narcissist. It will bring out the rage and the envy in the grandiose narcissist. It'll bring out the exploitation in the malignant narcissist. It'll bring out the shaming in the self-righteous narcissist. And in the communal narcissist, you lose no matter what. It's just a dynamic that doesn't really work easily. And many times, people who are making more money than the narcissistic person but want to maintain the relationship will train themselves to downplay their own accomplishments. So if you're out and about with this partner, and when people want to congratulate the person who does make more, maybe on their success, they may like, oh no, it's nothing, and they'll really minimize it to avoid activating the rage, the envy, and the shame of the narcissistic person. At the most extreme cases, some people will even relent and give up on some of the success or even aspirations they have to soothe the narcissistic person, and it's a downright tragedy when this happens. For example, a person may not take a promotion or they may even go to a less well-paying job so they have more time and don't threaten their narcissistic partner. This dynamic, interestingly, also plays out in other relationships, such as friendships or family. In a family, if you are earning more or succeeding more, even though that is how your family views success as money, a narcissistic family member, interestingly, will still find a way to devalue it. It is the perpetual catch-22. You can't win in these relationships. If you don't make enough money, they minimize and shame you. If you make more money than anyone else, they minimize and shame you. So if you can't win at these relationships, then you may as well succeed and make money, because they're never going to approve anyhow. Better to at least make a buck. A narcissistic person who is in a relationship with you will never be comfortable with you making more, even if it benefits them, even if it gets them access to stuff and experiences or a nice home or an easy life. It will forever put a hot, searing light on their feelings of inadequacy, and your life will be a series of passive-aggressive, potentially outright aggressive, barbs and attacks. You can't win. If you make too little, then you are treated as a drain on the system. If you make too much, then you have to face their insecurity. And money is the one thing that always takes a narcissistic relationship and makes it worse. At least that part of this story is consistent.
So, imagine that you are, or were, maybe you don't have to imagine it, but imagine you're in a narcissistic relationship that has broken up, or you're taking a break, but it's ended, at least for the foreseeable future. And let's just imagine it's broken up because of their bad behavior. And then, as it often does, at some point a hoover will begin. So you may be living your life, maybe even starting to enjoy the peace and quiet of not having to deal with them for a minute. There may have been some angry texts and messages from them for a while. They're dysregulated, it's what they do. Maybe they're angry that they are no longer in control. This may be more pronounced if you ended it, but even if they did, they just don't like having their supply be responsive. They're not thinking about you as a person, they're thinking about you as supply. Then one day you might say, those angry texts, the tone sort of changes, and they're sort of sending you a touch base text. How you doing? What are you up to? They may even send you a picture that you don't want. I don't even mean a sexual one. It just might even be a picture of a place or even themselves. They may say, hey, I saw someone that you both know. You may or may not respond. Of course, my hope is you don't, but you have to make a decision on what feels best. You don't respond. Then they may strike, just like a cobra, and they might start to say, hey, why don't we talk? Want to chat? Can we clear the air? And especially if it was one of those more toxic breakups, or one where you might have felt really unsettled by what happened in the relationship, or they betrayed you, then you may think, wait, what? You may stay silent. You may even say, no, thank you. You might even say something angry, like, are you out of your mind? Whatever you say, it's your right to do what you will. And then what happens? Weigh in if this has happened to you, that you've started having this Hoover experience, where they're trying to reach out, hey, do you want to get together? You want to talk it out? I'd be curious to see what has happened to you. My guess is more often than not, they will shame you. They might things like, oh, I guess you don't believe in growing as a person. Or, I thought you believed in forgiveness. I guess you aren't that good person you said you were. Or, looks like you don't even believe giving a person a chance to even talk with them after all we've been through. You've changed. Or, so much for you having all that empathy. Or they'll text you, what? After all this time you don't even want closure? Yeah, that would be sort of really precious that they're lecturing you on empathy. When their Hoover fails, when they feel like they're trying to reach out in a peaceful way to you, you have to be prepared for shaming because it is their gambit. And especially if you are staying quiet and not engaging, well, they don't like that. They would rather get into a nasty and angry back and forth with you than have you go silent. And if you give a simple and clear response like, no thank you, to their booby-trapped olive branch with thorns, then you are painted as a monument to incivility and callousness. Now, obviously, this is gaslighting on one level. The things they are saying to you are not only not nice, they're not true. And it's also a bait, because at some level, they're trying to get a rise out of you. They want the response. It may be that they want you to give in and meet up with them. Maybe they want to start up again just to betray you again or leave you again. Maybe they want to just have control of the narrative. Or maybe they want to start it again so they can just end it on their terms. Whatever it is, any Hoover is with their agenda in mind, with little regard with how this contact or this attempt to reconnect will impact you. What gets interesting is if other people start to shame you too, saying things like, oh, come on, you guys were together for a while. What harm could a conversation be? Or, oh, I bet if you forgive them, you'll feel so much better. I'm thinking, not so sure about that. Or someone will say, sometimes we have to be better or go higher when they go low, which is code for go talk to them, deal with the fallout, and have to go through the whole damned cycle again. Falling for a Hoover is not going high, it's self-sabotage. So between their text telling you that you are cold and unempathic and unwilling to get closure because you won't talk to them, you desperately want closure, but you should know you can't get it. And others saying, oh no, go on, meet with them. What's the harm? What's the harm? Lots. Getting those trauma-bonded pullbacks, doubting yourself again, questioning the days, the weeks, the months of healing, and practicing a boundary, having that ruptured, that's harmful to you. Being hoovered can be really challenging, especially after a betrayal-laden breakup from a narcissistic person. It can raise a confusing mess of hope, anger, fear, confusion. And if it has been hard for you to not have contact, but you pushed yourself and had the discipline to protect yourself, and then this happens, even if you don't respond, you may stare at your phone for hours, ruminating about their motivations and their intentions and all the rest of it. That part is easy. It's a game. Domination, control. But for folks who are still struggling, it can be harder. Then you throw in there those accusations about things that are not true about you. It's messy and it feels awful. The hard work after a narcissistic breakup is you getting to know you, getting more clear on who you are, doing the work of individuation, and not having your moods and feelings and life be dictated by the whims of an unempathic and egocentric other. That's the work. And when these hoovers pop up and you are shamed and blamed, it can make this work harder. But please keep persisting. If you can resist, it can get you to the other side. And in most cases, after their hoovery text, you don't respond, they get bored, and they simply move on to new supply. Give it a shot, and thanks again.